Hi, Kiah. Thank you so much for joining me on ADHD Her Way. I'm so glad to have you here with me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to get into this chat today. I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation, and yeah, I'm really excited for it. So, thank you for having me.
No worries. Well, before we get into the conversation, I just want to introduce you to everyone listening. So, I'm talking to Kiah Paetz today. She's an eating disorder dietitian, founder of Embody Health, and is on the mission to help you break free from yo-yo dieting, stop the guilt around food, and learn how to nourish your body without the obsession. Kiah also has a lived experience of an eating disorder, and her recovery journey was pivotal in why she works in the space as a dietitian. Working as a non-diet dietitian, Kiah's approach is to help find a nourishing and sustainable approach to eating that aligns with your values, free from restriction, guilt, and shame. Kiah is also the mother of two young girls, a 10-month-old Summer and a 2-year-old Skylar, which keep her busy and exhausted, and also have a late diagnosis of ADHD in October last year. Wow. And I do know your girls, they're absolutely adorable.
Yes, and they do keep me very busy, very sleep deprived, and exhausted.
You've had your own experience of ADHD. That was part of the reason why, we're friends, but also because of why I really wanted to have you on here too.
Yeah, definitely. I think all us ADHDers tend to gravitate towards each other. I don't even know why. It just seems that way. A lot of my friends who I've been friends with for ages, and then I'm like, later on in our life, we're like, oh, okay, we all seem to get late diagnosed with ADHD. So maybe there was something underlying that we all didn't know about ourselves ages ago, but that happens.
Yeah, I do agree. I have quite a number of friends, and I think through a lot of psychologists, I believe, would be neurodivergent. So, yeah, it's a cool crowd, I think. So, all right, well, we'll get into it. So, I just wanted to start with, I guess, whether you can explain the connection between ADHD and eating disorders and why you might want to address them together.
So, I guess the thing with ADHD and eating disorders is there's definitely a link between them. So, generally in research, we find that there is a higher risk of having an eating disorder if you're also diagnosed with ADHD. So, for example, the risk of developing binge eating disorder, which is one type of eating disorder, and there's a lot of different ones, is actually 6 times greater in ADHD people than their neurotypical peers. So that's a massive, that's a massive statistic. Also, just, while we're on the topic of a little bit of research, there is also this study that was done in 2007, and it looked at girls with ADHD, and it found that they were almost 4 times more likely to have eating disorder than those without ADHD. So essentially what we're seeing in the research is that there is a link between ADHD and eating disorders, like there's an increased prevalence, especially in binge eating disorder and bulimia nervosa, not so much anorexia. However, I guess the thing with this that we have to remember is there's a lot of undiagnosed ADHD and there's a lot of undiagnosed eating disorders as well. So chances are that, yes, we have these statistics that there's a link, but there's also probably a lot of stuff that we just don't know about, the real prevalence of it, because we just don't have that, we have low diagnosis rates, I would say.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the disordered eating is so common amongst ADHDers and neurodivergent folk in general that, yeah, I do think it's sometimes hard to distinguish what is the actual feature of the ADHD and could be easily addressed through some psychological treatment or what actually needs proper intervention from a dietitian as well, which is actually because it's more problematic than it may appear.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it's also really good to, like health professionals should start to screen people for eating disorders if they're working with people who are neurodivergent, just because, well, to be honest, I think people should screen for eating disorders point blank. But I think it would be really wise just, again, because of the prevalence of it, in people with ADHD.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so that's what I have started to become a bit more attuned to, and hence why we, do have, I guess, within dietitians and psychologists, especially seeing neurodivergent folk, there's a commonality there, and we do work together for that reason, which I really value. The different skill sets, I think, really complement each other and can really make a lot of differences in someone's experience health-wise as well, and maybe the right nutrition would definitely also, I guess, support the treatment aside from whether medication is involved or not.
Yeah, exactly. And ADHD is so complex as well. Like when we think about how nutrition can help, yes, the basics of nutrition and eating well is important for so many different things in our body, but it also goes beyond that. Like with ADHD, some people struggle with that executive function as one of the big hallmarks of ADHD. And that can impact things like being able to shop, being able to cook, those things that, people may consider basic. Someone with ADHD can struggle a lot with. And that's just how their brain works, and that's okay. It's okay. But that's kind of where a dietitian can be really, really beneficial in helping you create like those basic strategies around even just going to the shops, how to make a meal, how to make something balanced that's not going to take a lot of time. So it works with you where you are at, essentially.
Yeah, that is so true. I hear that all the time, that I guess failing to plan or just feeling like such lack of motivation or interest, and probably just the paralysis of the decision making around food. And all those steps involved, whether it's actually putting a meal plan together or it is just simply making a list of things to get. And then I hear including my own experience of turning up at the shop, forgetting to actually check the list properly, coming home and missing half the things. There's that frustration. It's just so defeating. And so I hear that a lot of people actually just, despise going to the grocery store. There's also, for those who also perhaps autistic, there's sensory input, in terms of like light, noise, and maybe other things. The crowd is maybe quite overwhelming. For the ADHD is perhaps too, but maybe be more about distractions and that just the amount of choices when you're looking at a shelf. So I can see how that aspect is so overwhelming, and then have an eating disorder on top of that as well. Yeah,
massive. It just makes it so difficult. So that's why getting help, it can be really important and really valuable, and that looks different from person to person.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That was so important. So what does, I guess, the ADHD diagnosis mean in terms of, you already touched on some of the treatment approach that you take, and, maybe also around self-care. Could you describe a little bit more about that, whether it's, more from the professional perspective or even personal as well?
So in terms of kind of how I change kind of treatment and how I change working with someone with ADHD, it's really about how does the ADHD impact their food habits. Mm-hmm. So for example, like we talked about, like that difficulty planning, making a meal plan with someone with ADHD can be so difficult. Finding recipes, putting it into a meal plan, figuring, do you actually want to eat that? Then having to go to the shops, then buying the stuff, then coming home, then making it, then thinking about, do I actually have the energy to cook it? There is so many steps involved. So that difficulty planning, something that, we try and when I'm working with clients, try and really break down into kind of simple steps. Maybe they have a goal of, making big elaborate meals, but realistically, when they get home on a Tuesday night and they're exhausted, they might not have any capacity to do that. So we might be working on something, using some pre-prepared meals, things like that. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely one big thing that we think about. Another thing is thinking about, how medication can affect our appetite. So being on stimulant medication, which many people with ADHD are, can really reduce our appetite and make us forget to eat, essentially. And on the flip side with that, like maybe not even from the stimulant medication, but maybe you're hyper-focusing on working, and I know this happens to me, and you forget to eat. We can't really rely on our body's internal hunger and fullness cues to remind us to eat. Yeah. So kind of that practical eating, potentially eating by a clock, that generally is, something that you do with someone with ADHD. That's something that I do. Like I have to eat by a clock because otherwise I will forget to eat. Yeah. And so, again, it's kind of meeting people where they're at.
Yeah, because is it true that like the interoceptive awareness is something that you work quite a lot with as well, around that being so limited in those with ADHD and autistics as well?
Yeah, definitely. So interoceptive awareness, which is essentially like your ability to identify like internal sensations like going to the toilet, identifying your hunger and fullness cues. With people with ADHD and autism as well, it can be really difficult to have that interoceptive awareness. And so, one of the things that I often work on with a dietitian, especially in the eating disorder space, kind of usually later on in recovery, is intuitive eating. So being able to listen to your body's hunger and fullness cues. However, if you're someone that doesn't have that interoceptive awareness, no matter how hard you try listening to your body, you just potentially may not be able to listen to your body's hunger and fullness cues. And so again, that's something where, saying to someone, oh, just listen to your body when it's hungry, that person might not eat then. That person might be waiting until the evening to eat, to have their first meal, because they just don't have those hunger cues. So it's something that, we kind of, and I think people exist on a bit of a spectrum. Some people can identify it more than others. But I know for me in particular, I don't really listen to them because I just get too involved in what I'm doing. So that practical eating can be really useful.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that would probably work for quite a lot of people. The only other thing I just wanted to add there, mindfulness type skills tend to help with, paying attention to body cues and learning what your kind of body scans and things like that, and just fine tuning that a little bit is something that I tend to work with as a psychologist. Again, it's not a fail-safe method. However, there is evidence to suggest that all those can make a difference to someone's experience.
Definitely. And I think that's like a really valid way of like when we talk about like hunger and fullness, a lot of the time we think, okay, I'm supposed to eat when I'm hungry. So that's that grumbling sound in my stomach. But no, when we actually think about hunger, there's so many different signs of hunger other than the grumbling stomach. Like a grumbling
starving at that
point. It is starving at that point. So like noticing if your energy levels are depleting, noticing if you're thinking about food more, if you're even getting some cravings, you're just getting a bit tired and sleepy, losing concentration. Bringing that mindfulness is so important because it really helps us, step in and be like, okay, what is my body saying to me right now? And can be really, really useful.
And how am I actually feeling? Like, it's more around the cravings. Is it because I'm actually really sad? And is that what maybe it is trying to say to me, is that I want to turn to food because I want to kind of fix the sadness?
Definitely, which kind of goes onto like, I guess, that impulsivity side of things as well. So like one thing, when we think about like ADHD, some people may experience that like impulsive food choices. But I guess this gets a bit complex as well with eating disorders and disordered eating, because yes, there's probably that dopamine seeking there, but then also, is there a bit of binge restrict cycle going on as well? Is there food rules? Is it both? Is it all of them? And it can be quite complex because it's all tangled together about what's going on for that person.
I think that's a really valid point as well around that kind of impulsiveness, and perhaps, looking for those quick fixes tends to be like the high carb foods, and just to kind of soothe that craving, kind of those self-soothing type things that may not be the most adaptive choice. And I guess, again, we have to step carefully here, but it can often indicate that there's disordered eating happening, and that maybe needs to be investigated a bit more, like you said.
Definitely, yeah, because we often when a lot of my clients explain to me their experiences of kind of maybe binge eating, for example, or like those cravings, intense impulsive, going for certain foods. It's often those chocolates, those cakes, those biscuits, those sort of foods. And we have to always ask ourselves, okay, so why is it those foods? Like, yes, dopamine definitely plays a big role in there as well. But also, like, when we put these foods on a pedestal, when we go, okay, these are bad foods, I shouldn't have them, we have kind of food rules around them. So for example, I'm not allowed to eat chocolate, it's a bad food for me, so I won't have it in the house. And then the only time you're allowing yourself to have it and give access to it is in these maybe times where there's lots of emotions, and maybe it's a way to soothe. It's kind of, it can create this real binge restrict cycle, which I think it's kind of really good to kind of like, as a little bit of a like overarching diagram in all of our heads to go through is, our kind of binge restrict cycle often happens, like it starts by experiencing some sort of restriction. So the restriction kind of might be, you know, essentially from food rules that we have in our life to say, okay, you know, I can't have chocolate, it's a bad food, or maybe you've been told that you can't have a food for one reason or another. And so that kind of can create a sense of deprivation. And often when we kind of cut out certain foods from our diet, we feel a bit of a preoccupation towards them. Like, you know, you might be fine with chocolate now, but if I said to you, hey, you cannot have chocolate, that's the one thing that you're going to want to have, right? Like we just get drawn to it. And then I often find that, you know, we have some sort of trigger, and that trigger might be like what you said, like that emotional side of things, you know. It can be anything. It can be like you had a bad day at work. It could be you're I don't know, maybe you had a fight with someone and, you know, you're just tired.
Or rejection.
Rejection, exactly. Honestly, exactly. And then that often means that we go, okay, stuff it. You know, I'm just going to have that food that I restricted, that chocolate, for example, and then we have it, and then maybe there's like increased impulsiveness in there. You know, we're searching for some dopamine because we're feeling all these emotions, and then that's quickly followed by kind of, you know, a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. You know, either we kind of go back and have more chocolate, or we go, okay, you know, I can't control myself around chocolate. I'm not keeping it in the house. You know, I can't have it. So we'll go, okay, you know, put chocolate on like as a food that we can never have in the house. And that just continues to perpetuate that cycle with restriction. So, you know, when kind of I'm working with these clients, you know, part of it is, you know, yes, working on, okay, our impulsive, you know, what are we like, are you, you know, what are we being impulsive with here? But it's more so, okay, can we start to reduce some of these food rules so we're not putting these foods on such a pedestal? So can we have them a little bit more freely in our diet? Because, you know, people often have that difficult relationship with foods like chocolate because we restrict them, but we're not really having that with like things like broccoli because we, you know, give ourselves permission to have them.
Yeah, no, that's a great explanation. Thank you so much. I think that's really valuable to kind of learn around those types of things in that way, you know, especially for those of us who aren't extremely familiar with the binge restrict cycle. It's an important one to, I guess, you know, bring awareness around. And if you notice that it's like quite dysfunctional, that maybe that is when to reach out for support, because some of these things, as much as you want it to be something that you want to be able to control, there is insufficient self-control amongst ADHDers. You know, there is just kind of like, you know, putting that responsibility on yourself entirely may just be a bit unrealistic to try and kind of fix that. And if there is a kind of a lot of shame around it, I guess it's just being kind to yourself and say, look, this is something I struggle with, and it's okay that I'm reaching out for support, because that probably will be much more helpful than if you kind of hid it away from people and like kind of like suffered in silence, essentially.
Definitely. Yeah. That reaching out to support is so helpful. And like, I think like that binge restrict cycle doesn't, like, it doesn't just happen with those kind of restricted foods like chocolate. It's also like, you know, restriction can be unintentional as well. Restriction can be, I've forgotten to eat the whole day because I don't get my hunger and fullness cues, or I got so busy, or, you know, I'm struggling with just preparing meals in general. So, you know, I'm not eating enough during the day. And then we experience eating a large portion of food at night. And that large portion of food at night often comes from the unintentional restriction of not eating enough in the day. But those similar like shame and guilt spirals, you know, happen there as well.
Yeah. No, that's such a good point that you've just added there. And I am also just curious about, now we're talking kind of about eating disorders, ADHD. If you feel comfortable to share your own experience, could you add a little bit about, you know, especially kind of the ADHD side of things, but if you feel comfortable, also the eating disorder too, around like, yeah, how that kind of played a part in your own life?
Yeah, definitely. So I had an eating disorder. Like, I'll go through that very lightly. I had an eating disorder when I was in high school, so kind of like in the early stages of high school, or so not early stages of high school. I was like in late stages of high school. It's just my brain, you know, it's ADHD. My brain's not working. It's the end of the day. Medication's running out. But yeah, so I was kind of I developed an eating disorder at the late stages of high school, after kind of intentional restriction, after kind of being like, oh, okay, I'm going to eat healthy.
Got really rigid about
got very rigid about that, kind of very developed those orthorexic tendencies, not eating any unhealthy foods, quote unquote, any bad foods. And that just got worse and worse and worse. And what started as like a, very naive, oh, I'm just going to start a little health kick, developed into me having a massive obsession about, how many calories I was putting in my body, checking my body weight all the time, obsessively body checking. And
like a hyperfixation.
A hyperfixation, massively, massively. And, I always say, to all of my clients, and it's relevant to myself as well, the eating disorders are functions, they help us to function in life when like things, we might not have control. And like that was it for my life. It helped me function in that point of, in that time. And so, that was pretty average to go through. I don't really recommend anyone doing it because it wrecks your entire life, like you stop going out on social events. Like all you can think about is food and eating. It's just like this obsession in your head. But I recovered, which was really good. So I didn't really go through any sort of formal treatment to recover. I just decided to recover, which again, I don't recommend. I definitely recommend going through formal treatment because otherwise it just takes so long. But, kind of going through that experience and, then going through the other side, recovering, developing a healthy relationship with food and my body, understanding about like healthy eating at every size and the non-diet approach. And, that food is your fuel, and it's not, it's not just something that needs to be calorie counted. It provides so many, it's actually more than fuel. It provides an opportunity to connect with others, like even just like little things. Like I remember distinctly thinking in my head, when I was like kind of deep in my eating disorder, I could never imagine getting pregnant because I couldn't imagine gaining all that weight. And now obviously I've gone through pregnancy, had two beautiful girls. It's pretty amazing life not having an eating disorder essentially. And then I also got diagnosed with ADHD as well. When I was doing all the ADHD stuff, it started by, me, I was seeing a psychologist for ages. Like I'm always a big fan of seeing psychologists, like you guys do God's work. And I just like, I don't know, we'd never touched on it. And then one day I like explained to her how disorganized and chaotic I was. And for some reason, I don't know why I'd never touched on it ever before. We were talking on so many different things. And then as we started talking about it, I kind of started to realize how much it was affecting my entire life. So there was a few different things that happened. There was us starting to have those conversations about how trying to be more organized and everything like that. And then my brother also got diagnosed as well, which is a big kind of turning point for me because he got diagnosed, I think, about 2 years ago. And I was like, okay, maybe there's something here. And then I started talking to my psychologist about it and she was like, oh yeah, yeah, it definitely fits the criteria, 110%. We talked about it for about a year and I started looking into it quite a lot, looking all the symptoms and everything like that. And like everything started to make sense. And even before I got diagnosed, it was really, really beneficial for me to understand that I probably had this because it gave me so much more self-compassion for myself. I struggle with organization. I struggle with being messy. I always have. It's improved with like time and persistence and age, but it's something I massively struggle with. And it was so good to be like, oh, okay, like it's not me. Like there's something else going on. Like, it's not me to blame. So it helped to give myself a lot more self-compassion. After kind of I had my kids and, spoke to my like psychologist, we kind of decided, okay, like let's go down the psychiatrist pathway. When I got diagnosed and got put on medication, and oh my god, best thing I ever did. I really wish that I should have done this earlier, and I don't blame myself. I just didn't realize it earlier, to be honest. But I also didn't realize it probably because of my partner, because my partner also has ADHD, which was undiagnosed as well. And he got diagnosed after me. And he is the opposite end of the spectrum for ADHD. Like he is the very hyperactive. Yeah. And I think being with someone like that, and he is very organized as well, the kind of opposite end of the spectrum. And I think that actually affected my ability to realize that I had it, because you're always in this environment where you're like, I struggle with stuff, but also he does, but it's different. And so, but then I kind of realized, and like this is, I guess, a big thing with girls, you know, girls present very differently to boys. He's very much that typical hyperactive boy, and I got inattentive ADHD. So, you know, what we struggle with is is similar but very different as well. But yeah, it's improved my life dramatically. I've never been so organized and planning in my life. Yes, I really wish I did it sooner.
Yeah, okay, interesting. And I didn't realize that your partner ended up getting diagnosed as well. He is also, I guess, a big podcaster too, and is very outgoing. So it doesn't surprise me now that you've told me. He's a very outgoing and friendly guy. And interesting your story around how kind of the ADHD was picked up so late, which is so common. Like, you know, as listeners probably have caught on by now, like the people I have interviewed and will continue to interview probably mostly have been diagnosed later in life. And yeah, including myself. It's so common and it's so hard to discern from, like, you know, what are other quirks that could be anxiety or, like, you know, could be explained otherwise, low motivation and all that, maybe kind of, you know, sometimes thought of hopelessness around more of the depressive kind of symptoms as well, and like kind of, you know, keeping things untidy, of being really careless. And but yeah, sometimes there's a better explanation for it, like you said. And I'm glad that you finally got that diagnosis, that you know, felt really benefited you because you got the access to treatment that you required. And on that note, if you feel okay to kind of, you know, describe, so you started the journey kind of in the postpartum period, is that right? Like you'd already had your two at this point?
Yeah, so April last year I had my second daughter, Summer. So she's 10 months old, and the Skylar's 2 years and 10 months old. And I think like that's kind of also like, you know, what starts this is you get more responsibilities and more responsibilities. And I was, you know, working as a dietitian, running a business, you know, having the two kids, and it was just getting crazy and things just weren't getting done. And like, I remember speaking with my psych about like, you know, trying to put in structures and trying to put in systems, but that task initiation for me was so difficult. Like, yeah, like I couldn't, like, which is really, it really sucks when you run a business and you have to stay on top of things. Like, you know, like just planning in advance, so difficult for me. Like writing a to-do list and actioning it, so difficult for me. And I think this is also part of the reason why I got diagnosed so late, was like working as a dietitian, seeing clients is quite easy. Like it's very responsive. You've got them there right in front of you. You know, it's quite easy. It's all the admin stuff that's really hard. And it's just like, and when I changed my business a couple of years ago with COVID and with everything else, and I started to have like more projects and more admin and essentially a sort of job that I'd never really had before, because I was primarily just doing a lot more clients before, that's when stuff started to really show. I was like, wow, I'm just getting nothing done. I was just doing all the reactive tasks.
Yeah.
Like all
the shiny things. All the fun things, all the fun tasks.
Yeah. And I even though like I always go towards that now, but now I'm conscious of it. And now it's like easier to do that task initiation as well. Like, you know, it's easier to clean the house. It's easier to cook. Like, to be fair, meals and eating hasn't been something that's super difficult for me. I feel really fortunate about that. Maybe it's just because I'm a dietitian though. It's the juggling. As a mom, you have so many things that you have to juggle. Mental load of being a mom, and like things have gotten easier, but that executive dysfunction that's really hard for me sometimes is like I have this whole thing and it's kind of a joke now. Like I have an eye mask to go to sleep. Like I can't go to sleep without my eye mask. But I have been trying, for no joke, probably about over 6 months to remember to put my eye mask next to my bed when I wake up so I know where it is at night. And I still haven't achieved it. Like right now, I have no freaking clue where my eye mask is, because every morning I wake up and I take it off and I put it somewhere in my house and I just have no idea where it is. So medication hasn't helped with that, but it's helped with a lot of other things.
Yeah, and it's probably not when the medication's active, so that's fine. Literally. Yeah, no, I do notice those things around my house as well. Thank you so much for sharing. I think that's always a really good insight, like for other people as well, you know, just hearing some of that can be really validating. And I guess it's very much, again, not diagnostic here. It's just, you know, individuals' experiences, but you may hear some similarities, some of which may start to kind of make some sense for you, or it may be that yeah, you're already diagnosed, and it's just kind of comforting hearing that, you know, it's professionals, people who run businesses too struggle with this. And that's why I outsource some of my things as well. And I found that incredibly helpful. I've got a VA who does a lot of my admin now, just being compassionate again, being like, look, you know, the important thing is that, you know, you show up for people. It might be some of those other kind of lifestyle things that slip a little bit, like a clean house and things like that, that ultimately probably aren't the most important things. And I think the food intake, but even that, you can kind of like do the frozen meal here and, you know, there, and like kind of canned foods. I mean, like there's definitely ways of working in that kind of make the part of organization a lot easier too.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of reflection, like trying something, you know, not thinking of things as if I've done really well at it or I've either done badly, but like a learning experience. Like, what can I learn from this? Like, I know for myself, you know, if I don't meal plan on a Sunday, again, I have the privilege of this is what I do as a job. I find meal planning probably easier. If I don't meal plan on Sunday and order my grocery, then I will not have enough food and we have to go to the shops, and it's just another thing to think about. We usually have our meal plan like up on the wall on the whiteboard, so that we can see what we're eating for the week and all of our snacks and everything like that. We have all of our food that we have like in visual spots in the fridge so we can just grab it out. We have a lot of I drink a lot of up and goes because it's just a good easy nutrition hit when you're kind of in that stage of like hyper focusing and you can't really prepare food. So
that's a good suggestion.
Yeah. So like I use a lot of the ADHD strategies on myself.
Box as well. I think you use those as well.
Yeah, I have a snack box. So we have like in our fridge, we always have like all these snacks, like fruit and muesli bars and protein bars and lots of up and goes. So that like it's easy to grab out snacks, and like, you know, that's just taken me being like, okay, Kiah, like if I don't order my groceries and do that meal planning on Sunday, like my eating will be chaotic. And it was for a long time. Like I say, this is a strategy that's worked really well for probably 6 months now. But I think it also comes back to that the ADHD tax that, you know, people always talk about is like when you have ADHD, sometimes things are a little bit more expensive because you maybe forget to pay bills and you have to I forget to pay bills and then you have to pay the more expensive one. Like my ADHD tax is like, you know, I have to spend the money on delivery of groceries. To be fair, Woolworths does $15 a month unlimited delivery, yeah. And going to Woolworths is probably, it is more expensive than like Aldi, which is what we were doing before. But if we're relying on Aldi, if we're relying on going to the shops, again, it's just going to make everything else so much more chaotic in my life because we probably just won't get there and then we won't have food and then we have to go figure out what we're eating. So it's worth it. That just takes time to figure out what works for you, what doesn't.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. Do you feel like addressing any misconceptions about eating disorders and ADHD? Is there any that you want to debunk?
Yes, of course. I've offered a particular type of eating disorder that's like avoidant restrictive food intake, and a lot of people with ARFID can experience significant sensory aversion. That's quite common as well, not with ARFID but also with like autism and ADHD, having a lot of like sensory aversions or texture issues. A lot of people might be thinking, oh, okay, you know, that person's just being picky, you know, they're just choosing not to eat the food, they're just choosing to be difficult. But that's not the case, you know. It's often not a choice that you have those. You know, it's just part of kind of, you know, how you eat, how you're experiencing your eating. That's not your fault. And I find that like in particularly quite difficult in like hospital settings. Like, and it's not just ARFID, it can be any eating disorders, and like combine that with like ADHD or autism. Hospitals, especially if you get admitted inpatient with an eating disorder, it's very strict, it's very regimented, and there's not much changing of that. However, it's not very neurodivergent informed, and that can be very, very traumatic. And I have a lot of clients that have had trauma like from these experiences. It's just not built for those people.
It's a long way to go there.
A long way to go. I think as well, like, you know, people with ADHD might struggle with eating, people with eating disorders struggle with eating. And then like you combine them two together, like that is just so overwhelming. And I think a misconception, a myth that we always see is like, oh, those people are just lazy, they should just be trying harder. And that is not the case.
Yeah. And like for those who do suffer from binge eating disorder and who are then perhaps living in larger bodies and really struggle with their relationship with food, again, maybe undiagnosed ADHD. And if that was to be addressed, I guess, properly, and, may find that they may not suffer as much. But again, they kind of maybe have a lot of the struggles that may be quite unidentified, and actually they get a lot of judgment because apparently they should just be able to kind of fix their impulses. Neurotypical people have different brains. They might find those things easier. But again, those with binge eating disorders, which is so common amongst ADHDers, they don't typically have that self-control in that same way.
Yeah, exactly. We often blame ourselves like, oh, I should have tried harder. I need to have more willpower. But majority of the time, it's the dopamine. It's the food rules. It's the diet culture that's kind of, put these foods on a pedestal. It's not your fault, and I think that's
not out of will, like lack of willing of trying. I think if people had the choice and they could kind of live a really content life, then they would probably do that, as opposed to choosing the hard road, surely. Of course, it's very complex, but yeah, it's very frustrating when people say, oh, no, they're just not trying hard enough, or just so many layers, and mental health then really plummets. So working together on those kind of things, and really, like, I guess both of us, dietitians and psychologists, really helping with that person improving their self-esteem, maybe getting the adequate amount of treatment as well, going through a psychiatrist and all the things is going to be helpful. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's just so complex, right? Like, you don't choose to have an eating disorder, it's you don't choose to have ADHD, right? Like, it's not your fault.
Is there anything else that we haven't already touched on in terms of advice that you kind of want to add as well?
Yeah. So in terms of like advice that I'd give for people that are newly diagnosed or just diagnosed with ADHD in general, I think the first thing is just learning about it as well. I find that can be quite useful, especially if you're newly diagnosed. I don't really have any major recommendations of like, places to go to learn about it, but like Attitude Mag is probably actually a big one. I think kind of figuring out what works for you is really important. Like kind of what we said with the meal planning side of things, that's something I've worked on for a long time, and it takes a lot of time of, trying something, reflecting, seeing what works and what doesn't work. And especially in relating to eating, trying, maybe this snack, building yourself a snack box, seeing if that helps you eat more regularly, and eat enough during the day. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, and kind of breaking down some of those steps of, okay, potentially why didn't it work? Was it because I didn't have any food available at home? Why I didn't have any food available at home? Oh, maybe it's because I didn't go grocery shopping. How can we make that easier? Or, maybe you had the snacks there. Why didn't we eat it? Was it because it was in the fridge and so we didn't see it? Do we need to put it like, on a counter so it's nice and visible? So it's about like breaking down what you're trying to work on into like small, easy steps. Get help, I think, with that stuff as well. Like, obviously, I work with all the like foodie side of things. You do all the brainy, scheduley side of things. So like those things that like you're wanting to work on, you're struggling with, you don't have to do it alone. Professional help, is great. Well, I know we're probably both biased in saying that though, because we both work in that area. But it is really, really helpful to work with someone that specializes, especially, choosing someone who is neurodivergent affirming is so important.
Yeah, no, I agree. Having that and I guess the support network around you as well. Like if people are ideally around you are too supportive, it's hard when they're not. And then I guess you do need to kind of choose those people to be your support network. Ideally, if family, for instance, isn't so supportive, or friends may not be, I guess, choosing friends who maybe are kind of backing you with an accountability buddy is what I was going to add as well. Sometimes that can help around, both movement as well as kind of food, and someone who maybe goes along with you to do the grocery shopping, or someone you meet up with to eat, making that a regular thing if you really struggle to actually enjoy, like if you're not someone who enjoys eating by themselves, but actually going out with a friend, you're maybe more likely to, go and order something together.
Yeah, that body doubling. Yeah, there's a website called Focus Mate. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Yes.
Yeah, and like you jump on and you do Zoom with someone and you can body double. And I think that's really useful sometimes. Like
cooking meals.
Cooking meals, cooking meals, meal planning, anything. Like if you someone that needs, I know I can't clean my house without body doubling. Yes. So I have to have something on the TV where someone's cleaning the house, or I have to have Matt's and home to clean the house with me.
Someone on to someone cleaning.
Yeah, definitely. I love watching a lot of like hoarding videos, or like kind of hoarding videos, or like clean with me videos. It motivates me 100%. Like I can't clean without it.
Yeah, no, and look, I wasn't laughing at the hoarding, so we're not making fun of that, of course, but I appreciate that, you know, you enjoy watching others clean in order to motivate yourself. I guess whatever works, right? Like if that is something, for me, it's actually having music on and like kind of doing that. Same with cooking, having things visual. You know, like you said, having things, I have a big fruit bowl on the bench and I always make sure that's completely filled with fruit. And if I need to have a quick snack between sessions or something, a quick nectarine or something, you know, something like that, or a nut bar, I tend to go for those types of things if I need a quick boost of energy. I find that really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And then like self-compassion. And I know this is something we both talk about. So like, yeah, self-compassion being that, you know, how you talk to yourself, you know, that is so important. You know, this is, you know, the world isn't especially neurodivergent friendly. You know, we are getting better, but we're not like, you know, things are still going to be hard, you know, and you're just trying your best. And that's, you know, like we know that self-compassion is a better motivator than guilt or shame. So, you know, it's really important to, you know, speak nicely to ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one, yeah, we need to always try and remember in, you know, most contexts, well, every context really, I should probably add. The other thing I just wanted to ask as well, I know you mentioned around ADHD resources. If people are kind of, you know, finding that they're struggling with disordered eating or an eating disorder that maybe they haven't actually sought support around, where would you say they can maybe check for some resources or where to turn to?
Yeah, sure. So definitely kind of like places like the Butterfly Foundation, Eating Disorders Victoria, Eating Disorders Queensland are really good, you know, in having a lot of helpful resources and a lot of free services as well, which is really, really useful. I'm going to plug my own website here, embodyhealth.com as well, like IMBODI, and our podcast as well. So some of the stuff might be applicable for you, some of the stuff might not be applicable for you, but like with everything, just pick and choose what works for you and what doesn't.
And what's evidence-based as well.
Yeah, and what's evidence-based as well. Yeah, but like on your website, it's all evidence-based. Yeah. If you are wanting help, that professional support is so beneficial because then you get someone that can listen to you, work with you where you are at, and give you strategies that work for you. And that's something that you're not necessarily always going to get from a podcast or a website or an internet, you know, I'm always going to recommend one-on-one support, but of course not everyone can afford that or it's accessible, which is why podcasts like this exist, to make things more accessible.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's really helpful. I agree with those resources. I think people will find those perhaps really helpful as well. I also wanted to ask a little question at the end, so then I'll get you to plug all your stuff. So what would you rather? So I've got two scenarios here. You either have just this, I guess, the most messiest house and you have no show that you can watch whilst you're cleaning and no body double. It's just you and the house that you have to try and tidy. Or it is just a never-ending kind of shopping trip where you're just kind of like every time you're just going in for a couple of things, but every time you're there, you just forget that one thing and you have to just repeatedly go back. Which one would you rather?
I think house. Because I do enjoy cleaning when I get into it. I just find it hard to do because at least there's an end point, there's a sense of achievement. Whereas with a shopping trip, that's just like internal frustration. Like it literally reminds me of last night. I don't drink enough water unless I love this like cordial that you get from the supermarket that I always put in my water. Not that one, but close. And like I literally don't drink enough water unless I have this cordial. And like literally we've had like a few trips to shops this week, and every time I keep on forgetting to get it. It's just frustrating. It's so frustrating. And I'm like, oh, I just want it so I can drink more water. And Yeah, that's just like literally internally seething right now because I don't have it. But at least with cleaning your house, there's an end point and there's that sense of accomplishment.
Yeah, no, I agree. You're right. I am not a fan of cleaning, and I would happily outsource it, which I'm definitely working on. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. That's been really helpful. Please plug your socials.
Thank you. So you can find me on social media at Nutrition by Kiah on Instagram and TikTok. So Kiah is Kiah. And you can also find me on Embody Health, which is IMBODI Health. We're got a podcast too where we chat all things improving your relationship with food and your body. We also have our blog, which is lots of things. We have an ADHD binge eating blog coming up actually, which we finished off this week. So just in time for this episode. So all this stuff was fresh in my head. We got our website, which has our mailing list. So you can stay up to date with all the latest things. But thank you so much for having me. It's been a great chat.
Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. We've been working together, doing different events and things like that for a little while now, and I really appreciate all that you bring to your community, and now also more of the ADHD community as well. I think the resources are incredibly valuable, and we have so much more to learn about this. Everything discussed, obviously, please go and have a look at those websites that we mentioned. I will make sure to plug those in the show notes as well. And again, very general information. However, I hope that this was helpful in just kind of looking out for some of the signs that might just get you to start doing kind of more research and you engaging in your own professionals on your own journey. So thanks for listening. Bye for now.